Morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you may be. Today's learning objectives really are three major bullet points. First of all, I want to cover some tools, and we want to cover some human system elements that's important as far as implementing IT systems. And we also want to cover 4 group methods. So that's kind of our 8 best practices. We'll have 4 concrete tools that we're going to be looking at to address user resistance, or I guess I would also call it benevolent user indifference, along with the resistance to a new system. In the human systems element, what we want to do is try to find that minimum amount of time we can spend resources on, but getting the maximum benefit for change management perspective. And so I've identified some human systems elements that I've run across in my career, and also based on the research that I've done. And finally, we'll go through into 4 group methods. And a tool is just a quick little thing that you can get together with the group and do. A group method, as we'll get into a little more detail, is something where we engage people in a systematic way alongside kind of a predetermined agenda to get some outcomes. And these things, by virtue of the fact that they've been developed before, we can go in and we can call these things up, use them quickly, and not have to design things from scratch, and get pretty good outcomes from groups in a very short period of time. So that's where we're looking at covering. And how we're going to be doing that is I'll give a quick little talk on change management and how it applies to new technology systems, kind of from my perspective and what I've seen in my research. We'll also then cover the tools and the methods and the principles in the context of 3 cases. So one is going to be a paper products company, another is a pharmaceutical company, and another is a healthcare provider who also provides insurance. And so I tried to get 3 very different types of experiences for us and talk about how some of these tools might be applied, because the tools and the methods are going to be fairly universal, and by putting them into play in a couple of different environments, we'll be able to see how you might be able to flexibly adapt those to the sorts of things you're looking at doing. So what's in play in any sort of IT implementation? Well, what's in play really are 4 things, starting in the upper left-hand corner. Is what we've got the strategy is very important. We've got to hook everything to the strategy, otherwise we're spending a lot of money and it's not going where we want it to go. Then we've got the processes that actually are the direct link between the strategy and the outcomes that the customers see. In the lower right, then we've got the technology, that's part. And then finishing that up as far as what's in play, as far as what we're looking at, is the people part. So we've got strategy, we've got processes, we have technology, and then we have the people part. And today we're going to be focusing really on that people part, considering that the people part is really a system in and of itself. It's a system of people who are interconnected and who influence each other. And it's also folks who are connected to the other elements, to strategy, to process, and technology. And so the key is that people have a choice on how and if they're going to interact with that new system. And so we're trying to influence those choices as best we can from a human perspective to make sure the technology gets the return on investment that we're hoping for. Now, it turns out that since you are dealing with people, logic can play a smaller role than we often like in people's enthusiastic participation. In fact, I love this quote by Mark Twain where he talks about, it's not the progress that I mind, it's the change I don't like. And anybody who's ever listened to some sort of a user focus group, these themes tend to emerge, though not as crisply as Mark Twain has pointed out. So the point here is that emotions and feelings, though we often don't talk about those in the workplace, they can drive behavior and results more than logic. So we're going to try to systematically address those. I think we've all run into, at least in some minor kind of perspectives, how just one user who may be very vocal with their network of coworkers can hamper an implementation and reduce the return on investment that we'd hope for. This can be ranging from outright resistance to passive non-support. So one example that I had as I ran across years ago was there was an SAP, there was a manager in a large SAP implementation where they're redoing all the enterprise's systems. And she really didn't have time and didn't pay attention a whole lot to go to a lot of the briefings and the training. And she was a financial person who then was shocked to learn that the loading dock people would be making adjustments that could impact the financials. Well, that's kind of what we're trying to do with enterprise systems. But as we look back, we say, gosh, what could we have done to actually prevented that from happening when we noticed that person may not have been going to some of the training type things, because she ended up slowing things down quite a bit. So we're looking at trying to, you never control that human factor, but you can certainly influence that human factor. So I like to think of elements of a human system that we need to consider. So here are the sorts of things that, from a systemic standpoint, is, for one thing, people tend to like certainty. They like to know what's going to happen from one day to the next, and don't like things changing around them a lot inside the workplace. People also have a desire for appearing to be competent in their job. People actually, it's important to consider personal motivation, because if we don't consider personal motivation, we just have a logical system that needs to get implemented. One thing that we often neglect is the whole notion of peers, the support that peers can give if they're trying to do something good, and the pressure that peers actually might put on someone if they're trying to get them to a higher level. The last one on this slide is also the notion of identity in one's job. Now, when you take a look at these first 5 elements of a human system to consider, you think about a large-scale IT system that's going in. While people are trying to maximize most of these, what you might find is an IT system actually tends to minimize a lot of these. Is people, unless they're informed and engaged, are less certain about what's going on. People are concerned that they may not appear competent in the new system. People may not be motivated, and their peers may not be helping them get motivated for the new system. And this last one here on this page is interesting, from talking with a bunch of psychologists, and that is the notion of a lot of people are really just tied up in their job. This is their entity, or their identity rather. And so people associate, like, I am a manager, or I am an IT professional. And so if you go about and that new system ends up changing some of those things that that person perceives as their job, and it ripples back to their identity, that's something we need to consider as far as trying to get the system to be implemented as best as we can. So the next thing we take a look at, which is kind of the list continued, is the mindset changes that people need to undergo about the locus of control. And we talked earlier about, certainty. People also like a certain amount of control in their lives. But what we find is, if we're implementing some sort of larger IT technology system, is we've got some control that might pass from one group's hands to another group's hands. And so people might feel a bit disenfranchised. So the whole notion about trying to keep the people's mindset and expectations in line before the system gets implemented is really key. People have a desire for achievement, so they want to make sure they can look good. People have a sense of fairness, that they want to think that our group is treated as well as the other group. They don't want to think that, why did we have to come in at 10 o'clock at night and do system testing until 10 o'clock in the morning while the other guys did theirs during lunch. People also like more versus less choice. And people, in general, tend to be social animals. So they like connections. They like to connect with other people periodically in a group setting. And they also, we found, like to connect to a bigger thing. So if somehow you can connect their job to a larger thing, that's an important thing to motivate the person to change in the new system. So here are just some things to keep in the background that we've got in our minds to say, what is it that we want people raising their hands to volunteer and say, yes, that's what I want to do. I want to be part of implementing that new system. As we take a look at anybody who's been whitewater rafting will recognize this as a nice little column as you're going down the river. And I think probably most people have gone through and experienced some sort of feeling good as the project is going along. The programs might be coded on time, currently 10% under budget, and the notion about what could possibly go wrong. And the thought is that even in the best situations, unless we're specifically paying attention to the people element of what needs to go on in the implementation, is we could be getting ourselves into some trouble, or at least some whitewater that we need to navigate through. So I want you to get your pencil ready, and I'm going to go through a few things in the following slide that tend to be